Franklin, Georgia, and they catered into the Chat-Flint area that we go to. Consists of Troup County, Carroll County, Heard County, Meriwether, and Coweta.
Of course, I should remember that Georgia does it still have 159 counties or 100 and something?
Oh, I don't know.
Lots and lots of counties.
If y'all want the fan on a little more, if you're cool enough.
Oh, no, it's fine, actually. It's just fine.
But maybe you could go back and tell us how you got into textiles.
Well, as I was saying, they moved our family from Carroll County to Hogansville.
They were farmers first?
Yeah, farmers. And our daddy left us, and then we moved to Hogansville to textile. And my mother and two older brothers went to work in the plant there. And the rest of us just went to school. And it was hard for her in those days. And I know she'd come in and she would be so tired, but she had to work. Our dad just left us in a bad time. He died in a bad time. He had typhoid fever. In them days, they didn't know what to do with.
This was what year?
It was, I was 4 years old, and I was born 1910. That was 1914, wasn't it? And so that's where we started, and we had the 6 brothers, and we were just brought up there in textile, went to school, and it was never hard for us. I know it was hard for my mother and brothers, two older brothers, but we were never abused, and it wasn't never too hard for us, other than her working. And we just grew up there, and my mother remarried again, and the boys were getting older, but none of them never worked in the mill anymore. They just left home, and one went to New York. He joined the Army at 18, and went to West Point and was a military police, in New York, and still lives in the park there. And
how long did you work in the mill?
He didn't work. He worked, I'd say, 4 years.
And you?
Me? Oh, I worked 32 years in the mill.
And what did you do?
I spin, and I enjoyed it. I never let the job worry me, and I knew how to do it. I knew how to handle it, and I was very independent. And I would, if I thought I was being pushed around, I would talk back. I guess you think but that's the way I did. It wasn't, huh? I know you're not interested in that, but,
yeah, no,
huh?
That's...
Actually, how were you able to talk back when most people couldn't?
They just wasn't brave enough. I mean, didn't have enough confidence or something. But if they sent me home, I didn't care if they sent me home if they fired me. I wouldn't sass back at them. I'd just tell them I wasn't going to do that. And
what kind of things would they tell you to do that you would have to talk back to them like that?
They might tell me I wasn't doing my job very well, and I knew I was. And I would say, well, I may not be doing it, but if, you can do what you want to. And they'd tell me they're going to send me home. And I said, okay, you can send me home when you get ready. My mom will make me come back.
Were you on production?
Not at that time, but we went on production. I worked on production.
Do you remember when you went on production?
I think we went on production when they went on 8 hours, What year was that?
That was 33.
That's when they started people.
Could you describe the difference between being on production or working before that?
Well, it was, everything went better then. What I'm talking about, like, you made more money, and you was home more. And, I had a family then. And, but I was still just that independent, and I still worked. But I knew I was doing a good job. And I just didn't. I would do my job, and I didn't want nobody saying nothing about it to me. And they didn't do it too much, but they'd laugh, and I was never abused in textile. I wasn't paid enough. But we always had when we went home, we had a good meal on the table. We were never hungry. We were never without clothes. And it just never was that bad for our family. And I know some people did suffer. And we had a large family.
Were you ever on short time?
Yes, they would. We were on short time. And I had my baby. My daughter was born in 1931, and I was then. And they started this union, and all that was just such a secret, you know. And my husband was he never wanted a boss, you know. And I said, the boss has got a boss, you know. You got to do a job. And I would tell him that. And his family was from a big family. And, but when they started the union, organizing the union, I knew he was going to get into it. He was just like that. He wanted it, and just so few did. And the ones that was going in it, I knew and I tried to explain it to him. You know the fellows that's going in there, they're just going to go in there to find out who's in it and report it. And that's exactly what happened. And they fired my husband for he just participating, just going to the meetings. And it was bad for us. I mean, that long about then, I wasn't working. You know, I had that small child. But it was rough then, along with then. But we still had food. And I just felt like something would come along better. I never let it get to me like a lot of people did.
Did your husband go back into the mill?
Yes, he went back, but not there. He went to Hogansville and went to work. But they came back and wanted to rehire him. And he started working back at East Noonan, you know, the Noonan cotton mill. And he started up the first looms they put in there. It started a whole new thing like weaving, you know what I'm talking. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but they made cloth, you know. And so we just we did all right as far as the living circumstances. We always had a house on the village, and they didn't charge you but $2.50 a month. Oh, a month for rent. And you didn't pay no light bill, no water bill. But of course, there was water in the house and lights, just, you know, drop-down lights. But
now, when your husband got fired for being in the union, could you continue to live in the mill house?
No. They wanted us to move, and so did his dad. They made a move, you know. And they moved out in the country. But we went to Montgomery, Alabama. My husband he played AAA baseball. And they wanted him to play ball. So we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, worked at the Boylston. I don't know if you've ever heard of that textile.
West Boylston?
West Boylston in Montgomery. You've heard of it?
Yes.
And we lived in there for 6 years, and he played ball for the city league. It was not professional, but he got paid for it. And I worked in the mill there. And so
your father...
And then after we left Boston, I mean, he decided to come back here. They wanted him to come back out to Bibb at Sargent to play ball. And they called, his brother came that lived out there, and they wanted him to come back and play ball here. So we moved back here, out to Sargent, and we lived out there. And but in the meantime, when we moved back here, and he was going to play ball and work, but they would pay him extra salary. And I went to work out there.
Sargent.
And I worked there. All this happened in 10 years, you know. No, it wasn't hardly 10 years because our daughter started started the school in Montgomery, and then her second grade of school she started here in this county, I think. And
Your daughter was born in 31, right?
yeah. And so the fellows that hired him overruled the superintendent out there, which his name was Bobby Lee. And we had been out there, just got set up and everything, and got our daughter in school. It was first, school had just started a few days after we moved. And they had overruled the superintendent. They hadn't told him they were going to do this for him. Some of the overseer did this, and then they had a superintendent. And they fired him because he overruled, the fellas overruled the superintendent. And they let him go. And there I was working.
Wait, they let your husband go?
Yeah.
Why?
Because they didn't ask the superintendent about it. He just had that much authority. And that was such a awful thing for us to do, and we just made that move. And I worked for about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and I was so mad that they had done that. And I knew I could go to work if I wanted to go back to East Noonan, to the Noonan Mills. I had a sister, my only sister. She and I were twins, and she lived there. And I went into work one morning, and
At East Noonan?
no, it's Sergeant.
Sergeant.
And I went in, and the job was the biggest mess, and I said, I'm not doing this. And I just went and told the boss. I closed the job down. I walked over there and told him I had quit. I said, I'm not going to straighten this job out, and I'm not going to work. They've fired my husband, and if you think I'm going to work out here under these conditions, I'm just not going to do it. I got a daughter in school, and it was a terrible place to go to school in those days because it was tough out there, you know. And the kids were kind of rough. And I said, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to stay out here. And he flat told me, you're not getting out of this gate. I said, you better believe if you don't open that gate, I'll climb over the fence. And my husband's brother lived directly in front of the plant. And they were sitting out on the porch with their feet propped up at 8 o'clock in the morning. And that made me that much madder. Them sitting over there and me working. I said, and my husband saw me when I came to the gate. And the boss was with me. He said, I'm not unlocking this gate. And I said, if you don't, you better open it. And he motioned for my husband. Is this silly, isn't it? I know y'all don't want to hear all this.
Oh, no, we do.
Great.
No, it's
Great
just,
story.
And so he called my husband. I said, I wish he would tell me I had to go back in there. I'd quit him a lot quicker than I'm quitting this. And so my husband walked over to the gate, and he said, what's the matter, honey? I said, I've quit, and they won't open this damn gate, and I'm going to climb over this fence. He said, you better open that gate and let her out of there. He said, you going to let her quit? He said, you better believe she told you she quit, and you let her out of there. And they did. And that very afternoon, I went down from there, down to East Noonan to my sister's, and went in the plant just to see her. I hadn't seen her in a while. And the boss down there, his name was Claude Boggs, and he came down. He knew me real well because he was a Mason and my daddy was a Mason, and when all this was, when we were growing up, he knew us from the beginning, you know. And he said, when did you come from? Are you still in Alabama? And I said, no, we moved to Sergeant, but I quit this morning. He said, would you like to go to work with us? I said, yeah, when? He said, you come in to work in the morning. And I went to work there. And my husband, they were putting in this weave shop, they called it, looms, making material. And they'd already told him that they would put him to work just as soon as they got in. And he started up the first looms down at that East Noonan mill,
number
West
one
Point.
or number two?
Huh?
Number 1 or number 2?
Number 2, down at East Noonan.
Down where the mill village is.
Yeah. And I said, well, I got to have a place to live. I said, my daughter's in school, and I can't just go to work. I got to find a place to live and get my child in school. He said, we'll find you a place. And they gave me a house in the village. It was a 3-room house. And we moved. And that's where I worked down there then for, I'd say, well, they got the loom started and they had the whole thing working and we were working and everything was going fine. And my husband was working and I don't know what happened. I can't remember just what happened. But they wanted him to come to Hogansville down there, starting up that asbestos, which was a bad thing to do. But he went. He was making more money. And so when a husband changed his job, he went to Hogansville. This was, I'd say, a year and a half. I don't know just how much. And he moved to Hogansville, and I said, I'm not moving. You can come home weekend. And that's what he did. And generally, if a husband left, and we were living on the village, and if a husband left, they automatically let his wife go. But this Mr. Boggs, that knew me all my life, and I was just good help for him, did a good job for him. And they let me work about 2 months and didn't tell me to move, but I was expecting it any time. And on Friday, they always paid us off on Friday. The money was in a slip, a little envelope. And they didn't give me my money that Friday evening. I said, where is my money, And my boss told me, he said, they didn't, your money's not here today, Florine. Said, I will bring it to you in the morning, which would be Saturday morning. And I said, well, they better bring it. So they didn't pay me that night, and my husband came home for the weekend, and I said, they didn't pay me, but Harvey was the boss. I can't remember his last. Harv Burks was his name. And he came over there to our house at 8 o'clock in the morning. He said, Florine, they're going to hold your check. They're not going to give it to you till you move. And I said, what? I was so mad. And my husband was the maddest thing you've ever seen when he found out. So he went up, and Carl Nixon was he was the president of Noonan Mills, cotton mills, number 1 and number 2.
What about Mr. Freeman?
Mr. who?
Freeman?
Mr. Freeman. Well, now, Mr. Freeman, I don't know if he was still living then or not, but he died. But anyway, I think Carl Nixon took Freeman's place. Or maybe he was older, and Carl Nixon was just out of tech and everything, And my husband went up there, and he told him that I was not responsible for that house. It was for him, and they gave him my money. They didn't give him no back talk about it. And I thought, well, no use me going back to work because they'll let me go. But I went on in. I wanted to do that, And Claude Boggs came to me and talked to me. And let's see, what was that man's name? You've heard it, I know. But tears run down his face, and he told me, he said, I don't know, I hate to do this worse than anything I've ever done. But said, if you'll get your house off of this village and move, you can work, and I'll put you on the first shift or the second shift, however it'll be convenient for you. But they gonna make you move because Jess won't come back, I said, well, he's a breadwinner, and I'm certain not going to move off this village just to get to work. I said, I will go to Hogansville one week. And, but they hated to do it. They were just so kind, And I like to say the man's name. He was the superintendent.
Mr. Wood?
No, Monroe Wood. He was just old. he he run the place with an iron rod. A lot of people were afraid of it, but I liked him. He was always, but he gave some people a hard time, and I can't remember the man's name. And he came and talked to me. Came to the house, and he said, "Florine, you just get you a house. Y'all get a house, and you just stay on it and let Jess work and come back and forth." I said, "I'm just not going to do it." And I quit. I just told him I would go on to Hogansville. I went to Hogansville and went to work. I went down and, well, they told Jess to bring me down and let me work. I went to work in the spinning room there. And I worked on the second shift, went to work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and worked till 11. And my husband was on the first shift from 7 till 3. And he took care of our daughter. He'd pick her up at school and all that. And we had it worked out real good. And I worked one evening, and they put me on a job that was terrible. And everybody said, they called it a hobo job. Every new person, they put them on that job. And I just worked and run it and sat down. And so the next afternoon when I went in.
Did you say you just wouldn't run it, or you did run it?
I'd run it.
No problem.
No problem. And so the next afternoon I went in. And the overseer, his name was Mr. Birdsong in Hogansville. And I was looking out the window, just standing up there. And our daughter was here with her grandmother to finish school. I didn't want to take her out of school. It was in just a week or two till school was out. And I was going to let her stay here with her grandmother, and then we were going to take her home. So they gave me 2 rooms. They gave my husband, said we could move into a 2-room place. 2 rooms, bedroom and kitchen. And so we'd moved, and we'd pick Joanne up, our daughter, on the weekend. I didn't do it but 1 week because I knew I wasn't going to do that. And just as soon as school was out, and are y'all interested?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Don't we look interested?
Huh?
We don't look interested?
Yeah, but anyway, that very, very, very afternoon, the second day I worked, Mr. Birdsong, I was over there looking out the window. My job was just going, and he said, "Miss Bowie," said, "Do you think you're gonna like Hogansville?" I said, "Hogansville's fine." He said, "This job you're on, nobody's never run it," and said, "You just doing great." He said, "Where did you work last?" And I told him East Newton. He said, "We've never had anybody that had worked like this from the East Newton in our life." And he said, "Well, you will stay with us." And I said, "No, I don't know if I'm going to stay or not." I said, "We got a daughter, and she's in school, and I don't have room to bring her home in 2 rooms." And I said, "I can't live in 2 rooms." And he said, "Oh, that's going to be a problem," but said, "I will see about it for you." I said, "There's a house empty, a 3-room house, and it was off to itself." And I said, "It's being emptied up when I came along today." And I said, "It's 19 Green Street in Hogansville, And he said, "Lord, so many people want houses, and we just don't have enough to go around." And I said, "Well, whatever. I just can't live in those 2 rooms and bring my child home, and I'm not going to stay away from my child." And the next afternoon, the personnel man, which his last name was Mr. Weld, and I was working, and he came down the alley, they called it, where you worked. They had frames here, and he asked me, he said, "Do you want that 3-room house at 19 Green Street?" I said, "I'd be delighted." He said, "Well, you can move in it anytime you want to." So help me, I'm telling you the truth. And that's how it's been with me. I was just independent. I felt like I had to say so too. If I was working and doing a good job, I wasn't going. And I felt like if they wanted me that bad, they'd give me that house. And I brought my daughter home.
Now, your husband, did he have anything to do with the union after he got fired?
No. He didn't. He was a sympathizer, but he didn't. I tell you, my husband was a fine person. His morals were high. He was just a clean-cut, fine fellow. But he didn't like a boss, and he'd just switch about. We moved, we moved to West Boston, then we moved back to East Midland. Let's see, where did he work? What did he do? I don't remember if he went back. I think he went back to work in the weave shop. Had a different group altogether, which they were some domineering people and bosses. The overseers, if they didn't like you, they just made it tough for you. And if you, I never had that problem. And I'm telling you, I'm not stretching things at all. I'm telling you the truth. And so he went back to work there. Excuse me. We moved back to Newnan, and I told my husband when we moved back to East Newnan.
To the village?
Huh?
Back to the village?
Yeah, our daughter was in there. She was just going into high school. And I said, let me tell you one thing. We've got to have some roots somewhere. And if you, when you get ready to get a wild hair again, you can go. And I don't care where you go. I care. But if you want to move, if you want to get a change job, you can do it. But we're going to be here when you get back. And we didn't move anymore. Well, he went to work. He died at 55. My husband did. And
Typhoid is... Typhoid, you say?
No, that was my father.
Oh, your father.
My husband, the whole Bowie family, his family, died from hypertension, high blood pressure, and heart trouble. He was 55. He had a sister 55 and two brothers 55
They all died at 55?
My daughter died at 46.
Oh, Lord.
And there's a niece now that's in a nursing home she'll be 60, but she's been in a nursing home since she was 34 years old. It's just something, the doctor told me that they inherited like a dog would inherit spots, the family. His mother died. Of course, they were much older than the children. And one brother died at 19. And I think about, I got a 36-year-old grandson and a 32-year-old grandson and a 30-year-old granddaughter. I think about them. They could very well. I keep telling them and warning them that it could be, they could just...
They're going to have to be more careful.
That's what, and they're old. I mean, their lifestyle is different, and
But if they're built like you, then they don't have to worry so much.
I'm a skinny Annie.
They tell me I'm built to last, and I think you're
built to last too. I've never weighed over 130.
Oh, God, I envy you.
No, I don't. I won't. I try. I'm taking vitamins, and the only thing, I don't take no medication. I drink one beer in the afternoon.
Every day?
Every day. Never miss a day. And Sundays and all, All my neighbors
drink on Sundays?
No. Sundays?
What has Georgia come to?
I go to Sunday school every Sunday morning.
When you come back from Sunday school,
Yeah,
you drink a beer.
somebody else.
So
My
you want
neighbor.
it on her breath?
Yeah, I drink it in the afternoon. I don't go to church for my sud. But anyway, my neighbors will call me, you had your suds today? And I said, no, not yet. And I had an 86-year-old that lived over here. And she'd say, Flo, have you had your suds yet? And I said, no, not yet. She'd say, bring it on over here. And she'd want, I'm talking this thing, And I said, can I bring you one? She said, shut your mouth. She is so old. And she'd say, they ought to pour it back in the horse. I hope I ain't picking up there. But that's about the story of my life. And then when my husband,
You're wonderful. We're having such a good time.
my husband, he flipped his lid again and quit, but he wasn't going anywhere. He was he's a pretty fair meat cutter, in grocery stores, and he did that on the side. He'd do that on weekends when he was working, and he did that. And then they started clearing up Jekyll Island. You remember that? And they did it with prisoners. The state did it, and they did it with prisoners. And they hired him to go to Jekyll Island. Several fellows around here. And he went to Jekyll Island, and they cleared that, to clear up that jungle.
So he was in charge of the prisoners that were doing it?
Yeah, it was prison labor that did it. And he was there, I'd say, almost a year. And he had his first heart attack. He was, let's see the year. He lived 8 years after the first heart attack, but 5 years of that, he was
Do you mind if I shut this just a little bit because of that sound?
Oh, you don't hear? Do y'all hear it?
We're fine.
No, that's better.
And anyway, well, if you get to it, the fan is on low.
No, that's
And he had his first heart attack over there. He was working over there. He'd come home about every 3 weeks. And our daughter had already married and lived in Atlanta. And so he died in 1964. But the last 5 years, I was strictly the breadwinner. He drew $79 a month on disability. Didn't even take care of his medication. But we made it, and it wasn't very easy. And then, but he was just one of those things. And now I worked after I retired from the store, and I started off $35 a week there. And after you'd sell 500, you'd get 10% commission. The first week I worked, I made about 300 and something commission.
Wow.
And honestly, anybody will tell you the day in the store. I know one of the fellas one of the supervisors, the woman that did run it is closed now, but she would see him at Columbus at their managers meeting, and he'd say, "How's Bowie doing?" And I said, "Oh, she's doing fine, still working part-time." He said, "She's one hell of a salesperson." And said she would say anything. She just had a gift of gab, and I had a lot of, and so that's about the story of my life. And I did that up to, I fell and broke my hip, and let's see. I was working out American Thread, and I had an accident. I slipped down on the oil slick floor and broke my hip. And I was out for a year. And then I was up and didn't even know I had a broke hip. But I decided I wouldn't go back to do that. I said, I'm not going back. He didn't want me to anyway. And they wanted me to go up to Palmetto. You know where Palmetto is. And train some spinners to work. And they, what they call twisting up the ends. And you did it left-handed. And they didn't get started. I went up there and did that after my husband went to Jekyll Island. And he didn't want me to do that. He said, "No, there's no use you riding up there." And I worked up there about a month, and I just told him I just wasn't going to do that. And I stayed home, and then when I broke my hip, and I was out for about a year, but then I went to work in the store. In those 15 years, I didn't lose any time. I was there at 9 o'clock, and I left at 6 if the store was full. And they wanted me to to go to Rome and train for 6 weeks to be the manager. I don't want no part of it. I don't want no responsibility. My husband is gone, and I've had responsibility all this time. I'm just a salesperson, and I'm not going to take on that. They said, "You want to leave at 6?" I said, "I get here at 9, don't I?" And I would. And that's how, you may think it's independent or whatever, but I did that, and that's about the start of my life.
But do you remember any of the other things that happened around the 34 when there was a big strike here?
Well, now, I wasn't working at that time, but I remember the gangs that ganged up at the, they had chains. But Lord, we didn't get out of the house. I didn't. But a lot of people went over there. They had chains on the gate. Is that what you're talking about? And they had shotguns and sticks and everything else. And they brought in a bunch on the trucks and things. But I just know that it was going on, but I didn't see it. But a lot of people suffered from that. A lot of people were fired. And it was all so uncalled for. And I don't guess they ever organized. But you couldn't do it. People would tell on you, you call them pimps? And I hate that in anybody. I hate it till this day. I think it's terrible to tell on your neighbor, tote tales, and somebody's trying to help you. But that was hard. People were there were people just as independent as I am. But they had families. I don't know why I never worried about it, that I knew I was doing a job, and I did it, and I didn't want nobody.
It's interesting how some people just have that spirit and other people don't.
I know it, and it's just a shame. It's a shame till this day, right here in this neighborhood. I know you're not concerned with it, but there is, we got these housing. You're not supposed to have anybody moving in with you. And, sometimes people get some of the family will get kind of hard up, and come in and stay. And I want you to know they'll run and tell on them. I wouldn't tell them if they moved the whole gang in here, because it's not in my business. And it's so wrong. I don't think God likes that.
Why did you think your husband was the way he was? Was it his father or anything of the sort?
Well, George, I tell you the truth, there was a big family of them, and they were brought up under, his mama was a strong-willed person. She was, and she slapped them around, and she popped the whip all the time, There's just people like that, and I wasn't raised like that. And there were so many of them. Let's see, I don't know how many. She had about 13 children, but some of them died. And I think the environment, they were good people, clean, decent people, but they were just strong-willed, strong, disciplined, And it's not, I don't think that's good. And sometimes you think, I'd say one of them, they were greedy. Not greedy. I didn't want somebody the other one to get more than him, even food or something. My husband had a selfish, I don't know if you'd call it selfish, I guess it was. But he was inclined to go out and buy him something before he would me, But I never minded that, because I just wasn't ever, he was kind of a closed horse, some people are. And I think that was because he didn't have it, And I don't know why my husband, I just look back and see. And I couldn't tell him, that we shared, and if he wanted anything, just go buy his clothes. He loved clothes, and a lot of men don't. His shoes were shined all the time. And he was a good man, but I think it was the way that, I don't know how to put it.
But it wasn't a kind of tradition of being in the Union or anything like that?
No. His daddy was scared to death of the Union. He'd tried to get him not to. He was just that frightened. At one time, his dad, somebody told him that his brother died. This brother that died at 19, he'd gone out with some of the boys. Nowhere to go. They were just maybe sitting out somewhere, everybody laughing and talking, and somebody said he was drinking. And I want you to know, they fired the whole Caboose family and made them move. And they had to move out in the country, and they moved out, couldn't afford nothing. Now, we were all right. I don't mean they fired us, but his immediate family. And the hardship they went through, that boy died there in this farmhouse that was just dilapidated. And Monroe Wood did that. And it's just pitiful.
Was Walt Bowie?
Huh?
Was this Walter Bowie?
Walt Bowie, yeah.
This is the father?
Yeah, this was the
And
father.
so the father had to move out with his
He
family?
did, And he wasn't drinking. You know, I look back, that was communism, if there ever was. Huh? It was. And they would have, they didn't know what bonded liquor was. They'd drink bootleg liquor. Of course, it was good. It didn't hurt them. And maybe on weekends they'd have a drink. And my husband had, there was 3 boys that was adopted. Well, there's 4, but the 4th one, he was the youngest, and he didn't participate in things. But they'd get together on Saturday night at our house, or at his mother wouldn't have it in her house, and they'd play poker, penny ante poker. And if somebody reported that, they would have made us move, and they'd have a drink. Nobody drank, and somebody had reported, and everybody was scared to death. No, they'll be fired. I have spent a miserable time that I didn't want to deprive them of that, but I was afraid that somebody'd tell on them and they'd be fired. We'd all be fired Monday morning just for playing. They didn't have money to play with. They played with matches and things. Just fun.
Yeah. But I can remember back in the 20s when my father wouldn't let us have playing cards or something else, but not
playing cards. Mom Bowie wouldn't have them in her house.
Because there's suspicion that...
but now, they were so strict. Now, this Monroe Wood, he was the only person in town hardly that had a car in those days. He didn't have to ride around to see anything. He had people just watching you, watching your house. I got a brother that lives in New York. He's 91 years old, that I was telling you. Lives at West Point. And they would visit us every year. And, of course, they'd come down, and you know how family get together, and we'd just have a ball. And I want you to know we were just scared to death. They'll make us move.
When you said you had a ball, what would you do that would make them...
Oh, they'd just laugh and talk and joke and sing or...
Make noise in the house.
Just being noisy. And they might have a drink. But what was that? And, I told you, I drink a beer every day. I never drank a beer with any of them. Never drank a beer till I broke my hip. And the doctor told me to drink 2 a day. He said it keeps down cholesterol and it'll flush your kidneys and all that. He said it's damn well better than a pill. He told me the wrong thing. Oh, no, I'm kidding. Oh, God. It was fun. It was funny, but I look back and see that wasn't nothing in the world but communism. That's true. I believe that. Little short of Russia. They didn't cut your head off or hang you, but the eyes true.
Could you,
Is anything else? I can't remember all that happened in them days.
Well, do you remember when this union started? Could you describe the organizing that might have gone on in the...
They were some fellas came in to start. And it was so secrecy. They would go to one particular place. They didn't have a meeting place. They would go to somebody that was a sympathizer, you know what I mean. that was interested. God, and somebody would go. My husband went to them, and I knew what was coming, and I tried to tell him. I wasn't against it, but I knew what they'd do to us, and it wasn't going to help anybody because I knew how the other people lived. I said, "You're not going to get these people to do that. They're too scared." And they were. They were scared in each of their lives. It's their livelihood. And they would have probably closed the whole place down. It was rough with the rules and regulations.
But how did it work? I mean, how many did it take? Did this go on for a good couple of months? I mean, we know that the strike took place in September 1934, and I know it's probably hard to remember months, but
remember they were organizing for a long time
right.
before that.
They were organizing.
So
yeah.
that's what I want to know about the organizing beforehand.
Well, they just had fellas that came in here to organize.
Do you remember when? I mean, for a long time.
Well, it must have been a year before then, or 6 months.
Do you remember the names of any of the fellows?
No, I never did know any of them. I never did, and I'm sorry I don't.
Do you know where they came from?
I don't have any idea. I don't have any idea.
Did they move in and live in the
No,
neighborhood?
they were in and out, and they had their meeting places. And my husband, they'd go after dark, you know.
Where were the meeting places?
Somebody's house, different houses. They didn't have a lodge or something to go to. And I really remember how, I don't remember names of the fellas. And they were really interested in trying to help the people. But you cannot. They were too frightened. The people were frightened. It was just like, I don't know. It was just, they were just scared in each of their lives. Their families were at stake, their homes. And nobody had any money in those days. They lived from week to week.
Well, this is why I think these historians you're working with are so curious about this time when 500,000 textile workers did have the courage finally to go out.
Here in the state, in the South.
All over the South, there were over 300,000.
Well, now.
The paper boxes, right? They make
Yeah.
boxes, right? Because
Bonnell's?
Is Bonnell organized?
I don't know.
Marathon is.
Marathon is. And that did wonders for this place. Those people that went to work out there, I got some real good friends, and that place, they pay good, they have good benefits, and they draw good retirements.
George, you were going to say something?
No, I was just thinking of
I cannot remember, George, the names, and I wasn't that familiar with it, and it was such a secret thing.
Did they pass out literature?
Yeah, they would give the fellows literature, and they'd pass it out, and leave it at doors and things. But Lord, people would destroy them things. Wouldn't dare let them see them on their doors or something.
Now, you keep talking about the fellows. Were there not any women involved?
Not that I can remember. I know there was some interested. I didn't have one thing to do with it. I tell you why. It wasn't that I was against the union. It was because I knew what it was going to do. And my husband was so forward in something like that and so outspoken, you know, and he was just real brazen about it. And I knew he was cutting it off. I knew they was going to get him.
Now, we know that some people in town here, have you talked to her about that?
Tell
I know
me.
that some people,
We will.
Eddie Mae Zimmerman.
Oh, I know her. Now they lived here
Yeah.
then. They're in Hogan's.
And the Horton Sisters.
Mm-hmm.
You know them too?
Mm-hmm.
And Eddie Mae's sister.
Leona.
Leona.
And her father.
Mm-hmm.
Leona wasn't there. She didn't come.
No, but she went out on some of the others.
Yeah,
Remember she
yeah.
discussed.
Mm-hmm.
They went on these trips to other mills to try to persuade them to come out.
Yeah, yeah.
And they got rounded up by the National Guard and sent to Fort McPherson for a
Yeah, a bunch of them from here did too.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
What were they saying back here when that happened?
George, I really don't know. I'll tell you why I don't know. I was just had this, my child was there, and I just didn't get out and get into that. It was a mob, and I guess I felt insecure about it.
Sure.
And I just don't know. I know the Zinnemans. I know there were other women, too, that participated, but I don't think any of the women went to the meetings that my husband and them went to. And I know one particular man, and when my husband came home and said he'd come in, you know, I said, well, you know what that means. Because his coattail didn't touch him till he went back and reported every name that was there. And it came out, you know.
That it was this man?
Yeah. And he was, oh, I could have strangled him. And I said, Jess, you know what he's doing. You know what he's there for. He had a wife. He didn't have any children. And he was so up for it. But he was just egging it on to go back and tell Monroe Wood and that bunch. And Monroe Wood, they rule people, you know, ruled them like, I won't say it's like communism. I know it is not as bad, but I don't see how it could be much worse other than punishment. And but I still think that those people, that, you know, it was pathetic in those days. From the time, there were a few independent people, you know, but there was a lot of suffering from that. And they hauled them off in truckloads like cattle and took them and put them in the, what did they call it, Caboose or something? No, Caboose, what?
They put them in pens in Fort McPherson.
And pictures came out of them up there.
Do you remember seeing any of the newspaper reports of the people up in Fort McPherson?
Yeah, they showed the headlines. You didn't have television in those days. Listened to it on the radio, just glued to the radio. But my husband got it about the first, you know, they fired him to start with, after it just came out.
Did they fire him before the strike or after the strike?
They fired him before the strike just for participating, for being there.
As a preamble to the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how soon after they fired him did you have to move?
Well, I can't remember just how long, but we moved. We moved to Montgomery.
Did they evict you? Did they say you're going to have to leave?
Yeah, we had to move. But they didn't evict us. They didn't come and move our furniture out. They might have if we had just kept sitting there, I guess. But we just had too much pride for that.
That's very interesting. Very interesting that they didn't want to, the shame of getting thrown out on the street.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
they would have thrown us out, I
guess.
guess.
That makes very good sense.
Not just us, but they were several.
That makes very
were
good
big
sense.
families. And I wasn't going, you know, with your child and you knew that you hadn't done any. Make more money, have better living environments.
Did
Now,
you believe that? Did you believe that that's what they were there for?
Yeah, I believe they were. Yeah, I'm sure they were. But one person, what can you do? If you could mention that to some women, and they'd laugh in your face, you know. You'll be starving and all this business. And some people just gloated over you having to move. But I'd come right back. I came right back and went to work back there, and just I was good. I was a good person to work. I worked all my life.
Well, knowing that you were a good person and you also was independent, I don't imagine that there was any problem about people taking, men taking advantage of you around the mills. We've heard that in some
No,
places.
no. I never. Now, as far as that kind of abuse, I never. I guess they're afraid of me.
That's what I was wondering.
I don't know if anybody ever did that. Now, I'm sure it must have gone on in some type of people.
Yeah.
And I was brought up to believe anywhere there's a lady, there's a gentleman, and I conducted myself like that, and I took it. I never put myself in that position, but I know people did, and I know there's some, as far as chasing you around your work and all that business, it might have happened, but I never saw it. I never saw that side of it.
So were you here when the people were brought to Fort McPherson, or were you already in Montgomery?
No, we were here when that was going on. But see, they fired my husband. I don't know why. They just picked him out as as a starter.
They were trying to make an example.
Right. So he wasn't working then at the time of the strike?
No, honest to goodness, at one time there, during that time, we hardly knew where the next meal was coming from. But we never went hungry. But we didn't have everything we needed. But we had a place for our child, and she had food, but it was tough.
Was that with your mother?
Huh?
Yeah, the place for your child with your mother?
No. Now that's when we moved to Hogansville. We had our child with us then, and my mother and I had a stepdaddy, and he lived down at Smith City, down between here and Luthersville. I don't know if you know that familiar.
Oh, so
down
they
there.
weren't living on the village then?
No, and my stepdaddy, he worked in textile all of his life, and he was a machinist. He went to different textile places. Like, we moved all up in South Carolina before I was married. He put down machinery for textile and made a good living for us. And I think that's one thing that I felt like. I felt more secure. I don't know what I felt. But
you
it made...
lived that desperate poor. That makes a difference, I'm sure.
And I wasn't going to let nobody run over.
Yeah.
I just went to the 7th grade in school. But I said, I got news for you. I could take care of it. And my husband wasn't a bad person. He was just not. He didn't like his job, he'd quit. And I didn't like that. And I'd try to tell him that you got to have roots somewhere. And when you get your child in high school, you got to have roots somewhere. And so she was going in her first junior high school here. We moved back here, and she graduated in Noonan High School. Beautiful there. And she was just as independent as I am.
Well, now, where were you living when she went to Noonan High School? In East Noonan?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, no, we was working. I was working at East Noonan, but we didn't live on the village.
Oh,
we lived out on. We got a house on East Broad.
So she didn't have to go to all that.
No, she didn't see all that.
Because I know that. No, but I was wondering. The high school was way on the other side of.
Yeah.
So,
high school was right downtown when she graduated.
So it was hard for people from East Noonan to get to the high school.
But we moved, and she went to high school here. She started this high school and graduated here in 1951.
How did you feel about not going on after the 7th grade?
Well, I tell you, as I told you, we had a stepdaddy, and he was a good breadwinner. He made us a good living, but we went to work when we got. I went to work when I was about 16 years old in the mill, and I quit school. Well, I just didn't go to school.
That was what was expected, I guess.
It was expected, I guess. But I've learned a lot reading, and I've learned a lot living, and
sounds like it.
and kept my head high. And to this day, I'm just that independent.
Well, that's evident.
That's good.
It's not independent.
Well,
You feel insecure, when my husband died, I thought, my goodness, and I was a breadwinner for 5 years, straight 5 years. And, but he realized then, after he got that sick, he realized how he had kind of skipped about, and things could have been different, you know. But then I didn't tell you I told you so, because that was life. It was meant to be, I guess. And I enjoyed working. I enjoyed working in textile, because I learned to work, and I knew I could do a good job. And he'd bring a job home with him and talk about it, you know, if it was a rough day or something. If I had a rough day, nobody knew it. I just came home and fixed a meal, and it'll be there in a moment.
I would think that one of the things that
you may think I'm stupid to felt like that.
Are you kidding? I envy you. Oh, I think it's a wonderful, healthy attitude.
I would think one of the things that a person as like you would miss would be the camaraderie of a job if you don't work. It must have been one of the hard things that you've been facing since you've quit work.
I thought that was the worst thing I ever done was to quit work. And I worked till I broke my hip. And then my daughter died, which being an only child, she was being an only child, died so young, and her children needed her so bad. But she was just that. She was real modern, beautiful woman, and she had heart failure, and at 46. But now she's got a 30-year. Her daughter will be 30, and her son. One son is 32, and the other's 36, and they all work. They work. One of them lives in Lawrenceville, and the daughter and her younger brother lives in Dallas, Texas. And the daughter is, she's in sales and catering at the Stoneleigh Hotel in Dallas, Texas. Got a good job. Loves it. Got a just bubbling personality. Meet some of us. She'd call me a while back, and she said, "Guess who I saw in the elevator today?" And I said, "Who?" She said, "Tom Cruise." I said, "Who's Tom Cruise?" She said, "Grandma." And if you'd have just had that spirit, if everybody took a spirit and said, "Well, we're just going to organize this union, and we're going to make a better place to live and a better living and a better environment," and to hell with that bunch, you know, that's beat you down all these years. They didn't beat me down, and they didn't. There was a lot of. I would have talked to the president if he'd have came in. And I told him, you know, I wore I remember I wore overalls. My brother that lives in New York sent me some floral overalls to wear to work, and they were fancy. And they had pockets. They were overalls. Well, and. My twin sister.
Was she an identical twin sister?
Oh, we looked like sisters, not like twins. She is real pretty. And anyway...
You must have been pretty.
Oh, boy. And anyway, she wouldn't wear them. Her husband, she is married, and her husband wouldn't let her go. I said, "You crazier than she is." So I called a girlfriend of mine. I said, "Oh, I got some lab overalls. We're going to wear them back to work today." We wore overalls to work, you know. But they fitted, and they were... You'd have to stoop and reach up and all, and I wore slacks and overalls a lot. I wore overalls in them days, and they were fancy, you know. And I called her. I called her. She was down in the street, and I said, "Were you game to wear them?" She said, "Yeah, I'm game." I put mine on. It was lunchtime. We went back to work, and you ain't going to believe we hadn't been in there 10 minutes back at work. We went from 12 to 1 to lunch. Excuse me. And here come Mr. Monroe Wood. He's big and fat, waddling, you know. I said, "Lord have mercy." A Seabee, this friend of mine, I said, I knowed he was coming to tell me to go home and get them pants off. But I was going to flat tell him I wasn't going to do it. And he come down there, and he was a big old fat thing, and he was red in the face as a beet. And I thought, what's it? I said, hi, how you doing? And as if I'd had on everything. And he said, Florine, somebody told me you wore your pajamas back at dinner. I said, are you out of your tree? I said, they got suspenders in the pocket. He said, they're not pajamas, they are overalls, aren't they? I said, yes, sir, they sure are. And I'm going to wear them tomorrow. He said, I just think they look great. So help me God. I did. And everybody was gandering, oh, she'll be gone in a minute.
Oh, that's great. You don't even have any pictures of you in those overalls, do you?
Nah, I might have some somewhere, but I didn't. I'll dig them out sometime for you. But anyway, and I'll tell you how they were. And, like your courting days, Now this, you might not be interested in this.
No, we're interested.
And when, we had just moved to East Newnan from Hawkins. And my husband at that time, everybody thought he was Clark Gable of the place, And they kept saying, Florine, you ought to meet him, And my twin, but if you spoke to a boy, if you spoke to, like if you had gone with anybody, or even liked some fella, they'd send you home. They'd send you home from work. And my husband, just before we married, he was going to Montgomery to play ball. This is before we married. He had some aunt down there, and some relatives, and they knew he could play ball. And he went down there even before we married and played a couple of years of baseball. And he was going, and he came by the only way you had to see to tell me bye, And I want you to know they sent me home from work because he came by. I said, I'm real glad because we got a whole day together. Just walked out of there like I was on a picnic. And the boss said, you just come on back here and go to work. His name was Bob Brown. He said, you ain't going nowhere. You come on back here and go to work. I said, yeah, I'm off for the day.
So what'd you do?
I went home.
She just lost a day, but she had a day with her husband.
He wasn't my husband then. He was just a friend.
Yes.
And the corniest boy in town came over one day and stopped. You know how, you don't know how it is, but them days, if some new person went in, all the fellas have it. And his name was Jasper Lee Johnson. And he came by, and we just standing there talking, And they sent him home. They were just...
Yeah, the Rainwater Sisters have mentioned this, the same thing.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
That's what Opal McMichael told me.
Now, the Rainwaters, they were so... Now I like them. Oh, God, they'd tell everything. Her dad was an old, dying wool company man. Yeah. And I don't know if it paid off. I guess it did. But now he'd tell everything he knew to. And I thought it was terrible. I liked them, and they were our neighbors. But you couldn't trust him. He told everything. He'd tell on anybody for drinking. He was teetotaler and all that. But nobody was a sop, drunkard, and nothing. They were just, they just needed something for relaxation after working all week, and somebody to pass in your house.
Well, now, you were obviously able to keep up with the machines.
Yeah.
What happened to people who couldn't make quota?
Well, now after nobody worked on quotas such as before they started the 40-hour week. And then they would cut down on them. They never gave them. They'd get after them and talk to them like this pretty bad, and I've seen them cry and all this. And your heart went out to them. But now, as far as just firing them because they couldn't, they'd cut down on them. They wouldn't. But they never seen daylight from the time they went in there till They wouldn't stop to eat and nothing else. I'd stop mine off and eat.
And still may not.
Yeah, I'd stop and sit down over there and eat.
You remember the Veto Man?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
The Veto Man.
The Veto Man.
Veto.
The time checker.
Yeah, I've had them to follow me all day long. You know, they check you all day long on your job after they start. Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about?
Mm-hmm.
And
This was in the 30s, right? After during the 8-hour day?
yeah. And they did that out here at the American Thread, and they did it at East Noonan too. And they were college boys. They were school, boys that came out of school, going to school, and they worked for. But I've had them stay with me all day long. They'd be tired too. I'd wear them to death.
How did they do that?
They just check your your.
Did they have a stopwatch?
No, they didn't have a stopwatch. They just had. I don't know how they had clipboard and all that, and they were writing all the time. But you'd stop, and that was a big joke to me. I always had fun with them. And they'd say, "You worked us to death today." I said, "I plan to tomorrow." So we ain't stay with you tomorrow. But they did, that Veto Man, and some of them, they'd get so nervous they couldn't do nothing, That was terrible.
They'd
But-
get so nervous? Or
Huh?
you'd get so nervous?
No, I didn't.
They did.
The other
They
some.
were directly under the boss.
Uh,
And they're college boys. They're just in there for the summers.
They was in there for the summer. They just checking your work and how much production you made and spinning. What they call 16. I ran 16 sides, and I forget how many spindles there is on the side. And that was a lot of walking.
Wow. 16 sides.
16 sides. I've run them many times.
Now, wasn't it that a regular job was like 8 sides or even 4 sides?
Some of them would run 4. Some of them would run, I tell you what, I was a instructor. I taught them during World War One. I'm going back, but I was in Hogansville. I taught them to spin. Sometimes I'd have 10 kids teaching them how to work in World War II. That came in, and I'd get them kids working, and I'd sit down and go all over the place. They could run my job.
See, that's when they had to bring all these fresh people in
Because of the war.
of the war, sure.
And I see those kids now sometimes. They all grown in families. One comes, I play bingo a couple of nights a week.
I bet you do.
And so
How many cards do you handle at once?
I play about 4. And that means 4, 12
Yeah. Good.
paper.
Oh, have you ever done that?
Uh-huh.
I mean, you really have to
Do
have your...
you use one of those little...
You have
Dollars.
to have all
Do
your
it.
buttons to keep up. I can't keep
I
up
won
with that.
$575 about a month ago.
Do you have little trinkets that are your good luck charms, too?
No, I don't have nothing. I just play it by ear. Just a night out.
I've been trying to really get a good sense. It's been very hard for us to find people that can talk about ever even thinking of joining a union or knowing people that did or having the experience when they went out and did it.
Well, they were scared to death now, and the experience I had with it at East Noonan and Hogansville, they had already, I believe they organized a union later in Hogansville at U.S. Royal, didn't it?
They did.
And I wasn't there at that time. But the only experience I had was here at East Noonan and around town, that other mill. And it was a nightmare. It was terrible living. It was frightening. I wasn't afraid for my life or nothing like that, but I just didn't. They didn't go about it the right way. I don't know what happened. I don't know where they had the right people to start it, to start the organizing. I don't know what happened, but it was just crude in a way, the way they lived it up and carried sticks and all like that. And I really didn't participate.
Do you remember Eugene Talmadge and calling out the troops and all of that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I remember that. I remember here they hauled up the Zinnemans and all, but not being into it. And you may think I was chicken not doing that, but the reason I didn't, I knew. See, they'd already fired my husband.
So they fired your husband, but you got to keep on working? You weren't working?
No, I
She
wasn't working.
You weren't working
She
there.
wasn't working
But
at
you
all.
still stayed in the house?
Yeah.
So you stayed in the house through the end of that strike, and it was after the
Yeah,
strike
they
that
quieted
moved?
it down, and we moved in the meantime. We moved down. My husband had an uncle that lived between here and Grantville. His name was Thomas. His last name was Thomas. I can't even remember his first name, but he was his mother's brother, and they were brother and sister and married brother and sister. This uncle and aunt that lived down there, and we moved down there in a house they had, and he bootlegged to tell you the truth, and so my husband we just moved down there. He did it just to save our necks and our pride, and of course my husband would go with him on those runs sometimes. I never seen any of it. I just knew what they were doing, and that's what saved our neck. And then
That's interesting.
And this daughter, the uncle and aunt were brother and sister that married, and they had one daughter, and she lived in Montgomery, and they wanted us then. They said we would get him set up again back in Montgomery at West Boston, and we lived down there, and he run liquor. That's what he done.
Your husband?
Well, he went with his uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And he not only, he had other fellows working too, and they run it into Hogansville LaGrange and things like that. And it made a living, and it might have been a bad thing, but it saved our neck.
And of course, coming from Carroll
I never seen any of it.
coming from Carroll County, where that was almost a tradition up there. Wasn't that right?
They had to wear badges to keep them standing to one another, didn't they?
I spent a lot of time in Carroll County in the late 30s when I was working with the Dark Flag Company. And the biggest legal job thing in the county was making charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
Though there wasn't too much of a market for it, because they had these charcoal places
Mm-hmm.
all over the place so that they could fool the revenuers who were looking for the stills. You see.
You heard the joke about the little boy that the revenue officers went to this place and told the little boy. He said, "Where's your dad?" He was a bootleg, making liquor. He said, "He's over the hill there." He said, "I'll give you $2 to take me over there." He said, "Pay me." He said, "Oh, I'll pay you when we get back." He said, "If you go over that hill, you're not coming back."
Now, Carroll County was
I was born in Carroll
it was
County.
poor county, but it's beautiful.
Uh-huh. But, it's grown. It's grown there.
Carrollton, I guess, is almost like a suburb of Atlanta now, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of the pallets like they've done here. A lot of the pallets have built around in this county. Dale Murphy's building a home down here at Grantville, and so is that Steve Bedrosian, ball players.
Oh, the pilots are ball players?
A lot of the pilots has moved in this county.
From the
Atlanta area.
Atlanta Airport, you see,
okay.
is the home base for Delta.
I have two questions.
Okay.
How did it feel to have to move from the
Oh,
town?
it was terrible.
Did everybody know why you were moving?
Yeah, they knew we were fired. Knew he was.
Did they know why?
Yeah. You didn't have no business getting in it, they'd say. But they didn't say it to me. You know, and they were. My husband had a sister that lived right across from us, and her husband was just as big a pimp as anybody. But they were doing it for their own hide.
Did he stop?
I don't know. It was ignorance, wasn't it? Just plain ignorance. They couldn't see an inch from the nose. But now, I don't know. That's in a lot of people right this minute that you go down and stuff. We have a lot of black that's in the textiles now here. I think Eastern and the mill down there, I think it's about 80% black in it. I ain't been down there in years. But it was terrible. We were never hungry, but we were hurt. You know, your pride was hurt when you... Not really mine. I just thought, well, you know... I just held up my head and said, well, it's their loss, not ours.
Did the preachers ever get involved with the churches?
No. The preachers were worst kind. Some of them, you know. The preachers there were hired just like, and they had one church there, and the Baptists had service there one week, and the Methodists the next. Everybody went, Baptist, Methodist, and all just...
What happened to a lot of those people that went on? I went to the archives in Washington, D.C. to look for letters that were written by textile workers from the area who wrote to Roosevelt or who wrote to the guy that was in charge of the NRA, Johnson, to describe when the working conditions were tough and the mills weren't adhering to the NRA codes, or describing the fact that they thought that they had the right to organize, and then when they did, they got fired and they were blacklisted and couldn't get back on their job. So there's all sorts of, letters and correspondence back and forth, and it actually lists names of people who were put out. And I'm wondering, were there people that you never saw again that had to leave the mill because of the union, and what happened to them?
To the people or the people organized?
So, well, not just the people that joined the union or the strikers. What happened to many of them?
The stragglers.
The strikers. What happened to many of them afterwards?
Well, there wasn't that many followers. There wasn't a group, a large group that followed it. Just some few that, and the ones that was pimping were taken care of, and they were the biggest participants. You know.
Remember.
When you say pimping, can you explain that?
Well, it means they go to these go and participate in the meetings and agree with everything and go straight back to the boss and tell them, and they're out.
Don't you remember Eddie May was telling us about the secretary of the union got paid off with a good office job.
So you leave.
Yeah. So that's what gutted the local there.
The people the biggest, there was very few people that really got just plain fired, because the people that was meeting with these organizers or whatever, they were planted there. They said, go ahead and get with it and let us know what's going on. And so that's what happened. They were planted there. They were just, the boss would tell them, Monroe Wood and that group.
Did the big bosses, not Mr. Wood, but the owners?
Freeman owned it.
Yeah. Did they ever come through the mills?
Yes, they'd come through occasionally, and he got up. And let's see, what was his speech the day they had that? I wasn't there, but he came down the day they cut the chains on. The people chained the gates. The people had to join, the sympathizers, I don't know if they ever really joined it or not, and put a chain on the gates. And he came down and when they cut them, the locks and chains and what all, he made a big speech, but I don't remember the speech. Somebody may have a copy of it, I don't know.
Mr. Freeman made a speech.
But did you ever get to know Mr. Freeman?
Yeah, I knew him when I seen him. And he was a fine fellow. I mean, he was just one of... I tell you, Noonan was controlled by the Freemans, the Coles, and the Arnolds. They were the Arnolds owned the mills at Sergeant Iron Co. And Freeman's here, and the mill here. But I think Mr. Freeman, let's see, what happened to him? But I think he kind of came around to treating, they were treated better after then, even though it was such a nasty thing. But the people were treated better. And the ones that did, that they let go. And my husband, I can't remember who all was fired with us, because it was such a catastrophe for us, you know. And I knew it was coming, because I knew they'd get him, because he was so outspoken, my husband.
Who would he talk? I mean, when you say he was outspoken, he was
Well,
outspoken at his meetings?
he'd talk to anybody on the street. Yeah. He was really working at organizing it, getting it started. And every time, he put his foot in it every time he'd do it. And I knew he was doing it, but...
Did you ever hear him talk about it? I mean, discuss it?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He just wanted it for the benefit of the people. And there'd be more money, more living environments, and more prosperity.
Did he take any newspapers, labor newspapers, anything like that?
Yeah, he got mail from them, you know. They'd send us mail.
Did he go door to door to talk to people?
No, he didn't dare do that. But he'd meet them on the street, and they had a pool room there, and he'd meet up there, and he'd tell them.
That's the one that Mr. McCullough's family
Mr. McCullough run. And see, they were old. The families were there and established, and they just, now the McCulloughs, they worked in the mill, but their daddy was a barber. Never had no more than anybody else. Everybody else was living just alike there, just a living. And and some people maybe had a little more than others. But we fared real good. We were doing real good. But my husband just wanted the union so bad. And he'd talk it up. And he would even after he was fired. He'd just keep yakking.
Would he talk to you about it?
Yeah. I just let him talk. I said, well, I hope it turns out it got us, but maybe it'll help somebody else. And we moved. He moved down there. We moved down in a little house. It was comfortable, and he worked with his uncle, and his uncle just did that. He took care of him, you know, and never took any chances. Like he knew what he was doing anyhow.
But the bootlegging was it a dangerous occupation then?
Well, it wasn't, you know, they would, I don't know where he'd get, they'd go on a run, he didn't make it, he just had somebody.
Oh, they'd go up to the mountains and get it.
They'd go in the mountains and get it and deliver it to different clubs, in LaGrange and Hogansville. Of course, he was taking a chance.
You see, I was reared in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And that whole mountain area just above it supplied Winston-Salem.
Thunder Road, wasn't it?
But my father was such a staunch prohibitionist that I hardly knew what was happening until one weekend my two sisters and I went to Chapel Hill on a football.
Never, we were like that. I was raised with 6 brothers, and if they ever drank, I didn't know it. And, you know, they just wasn't all that moving around.
But when I went to Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina.
My son, it's beautiful at Chapel Hill, isn't it?
Really?
The students drank just sick, terrible.
That what?
The students, when I was at Chapel Hill.
You know, my son-in-law's, he's got a brother that lives in Chapel Hill. Well, I believe he's superintendent of the school or professor or something. Will Cherry, did you ever know him?
I don't know.
They live in Raleigh. I mean, he was raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, my son-in-law. But anyway, that my husband did that, but it got us over the hump. We moved in there and moved.
When you moved back down to Hogansville and then to East Noonan, did they still connect your husband with the union?
No, they just all died down. You know, nobody thought nothing about it. That's what makes it so bad, that you go through that turmoil and fight and put everything you got into it, and then they forget it.
Yeah.
Forget it. And they don't hold it again. They was just, it's ignorance. I know I won't say that. It's just, they were frightened. They were just scared.
Yeah.
And some of it was ignorance. And some of it was just, they were scared to take a chance with their families. Some of them had big families. We just had that one child, and my husband wasn't that irresponsible. His first thoughts were of us, I'm sure, but he'd take a notion to quit his job and he'd do it. And
now I was under the impression that people really that there were lists of people that might have been in the union or tried to be in the union, and they would never be able to get rehired.
Well, they hired my husband back. They
But
forgot
it
it.
was a long time.
Yeah, in a period of 5 years, and maybe longer. But they forgot it. Just they squashed that down. That was off. Just brushed it off, and it's that way to this day. Of course, they make more money and making better wages and everything now.
Now, do you think? So people. What were you gonna say?
Do you think that the union they'll ever organize in the South like they should? Well, now I thought Bonnell was union.
I don't think so, because I know two people that work there. Judging from what they tell me, it certainly isn't organized, but Marathon is, because Edna Freeman worked at Marathon.
Who?
Edna Freeman, Budnell's wife.
Yeah, I know her. Well, I know everybody in Noonan just about, and everybody knows me. I've been around a long time.
I know. You are such a good storyteller.
Just wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Since
Him, you know.
this is your father, your
My stepfather.
Stepfather.
and this was in East Noonan
And,
also?
yeah, he lived there then, but they didn't report him. Whoever told, but that's for sure. But he still spoke up for it, but he couldn't read and write his own name hardly. But he could, everything he touched turned to money. You know, he could do anything with his hands. You've seen people like that. Just a huge guy, and just so uneducated. And my mother, of course, before he died, and my mother died, she had taught him, and they run a little country store at Covington, and they
She taught him how to read and write?
Yeah, they had a little country store. He built his house and everything, and they built this little store, and they run that store. And they paid the tax, and they did everything.
Did you vote?
Yes, sir, I vote.
Did you pay poll tax and vote back in the 30s too?
I've been voting since, I would say I've been voting in 30, maybe.
Right after the amendment was passed.
They paid $1 poll tax when I started voting. I don't know what year I started,
It was
but
$1, I think it's $1.50 for Georgia.
well, anyway, and I vote.
You know what I saw in the newspaper?
What?
I saw that they
I'm Democrat though. I ain't Republican, and I don't care who knows it.
That's a good thing. I feel better about that too. In the newspaper, I was looking at the section for 1933, 34, 35. And I guess every couple of months they would say, these are the people in Noonan who are registered voters. And then it would say white males, and it would list all their names, and then white
Well, you know,
females.
since I was gone, I'd say, now when I was in Hogansville, I would come up here and vote, but I didn't vote every year that we were in Montgomery. But when I came back, I just got reinstated, you know. I vote. I'm going to vote.
Yep.
as long as I can. Then I'll write it in.
Listen,